Good morning. Welcome to this latest in the RIBA Journal PiP seminar series. We're looking at housing and residential development today, and I think this is the first one that we've actually done online. I think people are still coming in, but I will just run through a little bit of housekeeping for this event. We've got some great speakers who I am going to introduce in a moment, and obviously a great topic. Each of our speakers is going to speak for about 15 minutes, and then we will take 5 minutes of questions for the speaker. So if a question occurs to you, please send it in using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. Do it please on Q&A rather than chat. The other thing is that we are going to have a little comfort break when you can go and make a cup of tea or whatever at 9:45. I would ask you not to log out, not to switch off your computer, just to leave it running, and we will start again promptly at 10. I think that's probably most of it. So just coming back, and I'm hoping you're all here now and all eager. I know we've got a great list of people coming along. This is the PiP seminar series, and this is the one on housing and residential development. So you're all in the right place. And I think you're attending something which is just such a fascinating subject at the moment. Obviously, housing is always important, but a couple of things have come up. One of them obviously to do directly with C19, which is people are beginning to question, as so many people are working remotely, and as the things people have appreciated from their homes have changed, actually where in the country they want to live. It will be interesting to see if we actually have a push against city centre living. And the other thing, of course, which is really recent, is Boris Johnson's build announcement, which is not just for schools, it is also going to affect housing. So I think what we've got is a set of speakers who are really right on the button. I will introduce them briefly, but actually there is more detail in a briefing document which you can download from the chat function. So first of all, we're going to have, I'll tell you about the first two sessions. First of all, we're going to have David Ogunmuyiwa, who is a partner in ArchitectureDoingPlace, and who comes from a unique and very interesting position of actually having been a social housing officer. He's going to talk about a project that he's designed, but also, he has this really wide view. He teaches architecture in several places. He has a number of strategic advisory roles, etc. And then we're going to be right on the button because we are having an interview which Helen Castle, Publishing Director of RIBA Journal, is going to hold with Julia Park, who is Head of Housing Research at Levitt Bernstein, and they are going to talk about how we could do things differently and better. And this is actually in the wake of Boris Johnson's announcement on build. So as I said, we could not be more topical. After that, we're going to have our break, and then we do have two further speakers, really great speakers. We've got Kate McGechan of Haverstock talking about a project of hers, and then lastly, this whole event is in association with Kingspan, and we have Karen Jones, residential development manager, talking about the value of space. As I said, in each case, do push your questions in when you can. Some of our speakers do have to go very promptly, so we will have those questions after they speak. There won't really be a round table discussion at the end. But thank you very much. And I think all I need to do now is to hand over to David, please.
Good morning. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Oh, fabulous. Morning. I'm David Ogunmuyiwa from a small practice called ArchitectureDoingPlace. I'm just going to actually share my screen, if you bear with me a moment. my presentation. Across there. There we go. So we're called ArchitectureDoingPlace. I'm going to run through a series of schemes that we've been working on with the London Borough of Tower Hamlets over the last couple of years. And I say a couple of years because the time frame is defined by quite a bit of community consultation, which is an approach that we try and take in our design work. A second. There we go. The first of these projects is called Philpott Street, and this was an infill feasibility study. We do a lot of estate regeneration infill. By that I mean looking at pockets of space and demonstrating their viability using council-owned land. This specific corner in Whitechapel, which is very close to Commercial Road on the one side and Whitechapel High Street on the other side, and the Royal London Hospital, is on the corner of a 1960s estate that was a medium-rise system-built estate. It looks like a green space, but it's one of those kind of green amenities that is there to look at and not use. And actually, whilst there is planting around the edge of it, it's actually all hard standing, and there's basically dustbins there, and it's used for waste and kind of just collects dust, and it becomes an eyesore. It's also becomes a magnet for antisocial behavior. So we look at these opportunities to kind of kill a few birds with one stone. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the kind of edge of a stair tower that goes up that provides vertical access for the building on the right. And that was our starting point. We looked at how we might kind of use that to re-engineer that, re-look at different kind of access and refuse arrangements that would allow us to also infill next to it. We wanted to explore materiality, looking at rammed earth, and try to see if we could use rammed earth on a local authority social housing project in a way that hasn't really been done in the UK before. This became possible because of the very small scale, because they were only looking for 3 units. It's about 3 stories high, and then we could put another story on top, a kind of attic story, a decorative attic story on top of that. And we just wanted to kind of start to look at how we might be able to use rammed earth briquettes and cassettes to construct a facade, and not just use the kind of concrete load-bearing structure that had been there previously, and extend that language. We, again, like I said, we wanted to use a stair core and the common access to create a kind of convivial communal space where people could meet each other. It's open to the air, so it's kind of got those benefits in the age of COVID and epidemics. It's actually preceded that, but it was something that we started to anticipate, these kind of open, airy spaces where people could meet, where we could use to rationalize refuse and things like cycle storage. The next project is a slightly bigger project, and this was our first project actually for London Borough of Tower Hamlets. It's called Waterloo Gardens. It's in Bethnal Green. It's in the conservation area. It's in the Victoria Park Conservation Area. It's right on the embankment of the Grand Union Canal, and it's overlooking Victoria Park. So it's actually a kind of really interesting site, but it's strangely kind of cut off from each other because of the way that it was originally set out in the mid-19th century. And one of our first aims was to provide a kind of placemaking approach to repair the urban fabric, to deal with issues of security and antisocial behavior, to provide sight lines and passive overlooking, and just kind of eliminate razor wire and CCTV, which characterizes a lot of the area at the moment. So not only creating a better public space and creating better links along the edge of the Grand Union Canal, so that, for instance, you could walk from Bethnal Green to Hackney along that edge, which you can't do at the moment. You have to kind of go around and do a loop around. But also to make sure that whatever we did there also created a kind of better set of connections and a better set of amenities for the people who live there, while also co-locating housing. The building in the foreground, is a community centre and a nursery. That's actually being done by another team made up of 2 separate architects. So it's a kind of collaboration as well. Those 2 architects are Makespace and You and Me. We did the kind of master planning for the whole site, but also did the housing. You can see those kind of chimney tall points that we put there. The reason that we wanted those there was because it was in the conservation area that the planners wanted us to deal with the issue of. They wanted some kind of reference to the past. I've always avoided kind of being twee, but one of the things that we felt that this alluded to is the kind of urban kind of fringe that this used to represent in the early 18th century, in the early 19th century when it was first built. So that kind of waterside urban fringe where you have the waterside and then you have this rolling parkland which used to form the edge of dense London. And we did like the idea that if you look at this, there's kind of lots of chimneys in the context, and we kind of wanted to use this as tall points, but then use that as identity. And a kind of wayfinding as a sense of order to what might ordinarily look like a couple of kind of big lumps of housing. Another scheme that we're looking at the moment, we're really excited about this, is called Old Willows Close. This is in Bow. Now, what we're most excited about this is it's an Irish Travellers site where we've been asked to expand the number of pitches there and provide a community centre. We're really fascinated by this because it's a kind of marginalised group of Londoners who also have lack of housing issues, but we never really understood that. So it's an opportunity for us to learn as well, and for us to kind of look at how we might provide facilities for them and their way of life. We're doing a few options about reinterpreting the entire estate, re-providing, not just re-providing new pitches, but also arranging the existing pitches that are there. The next project that we're working on is called Edward Mann Close, and that's in Limehouse. And this is an opportunity for us to look at a kind of mansion block typology. This is adjacent to the DLR that goes from Canary Wharf straight into Bank, if anybody knows it. It backs right onto the Troxy music venue at the other side of the railway viaduct, if anybody knows that. But it's a very kind of enclosed, compressed site that was first established in the interwar years in the 1920s. The south side of the site faces directly onto the long and historic Cable Street as well. So it's in a very historic part of London. We wanted to work with the kind of urban grain and reinstate this kind of end piece to the estate. So you'll notice the kind of theme of where everything that we're doing is trying to work with the place and the kind of communal, the historic nature of what's there currently, but also trying to provide infill that alleviates kind of pressing local housing needs. We wanted to not just think about this as a kind of mansion block typology, but we looked at Albert Hall mansions, which was a kind of the original mansion block example by Richard Norman Shaw in Kensington, Chelsea, exactly opposite Royal Albert Hall. But we also kind of took from that all these kind of decorative terracotta details, and the image just above it is of a building that we found in Leicestershire, which has got these kind of strange kind of brick terracotta pediments, and it's very decorative openings, but it's also got these kind of dwarf columns. And then we found an example that's a lot more kind of contemporary, well, by contemporary I mean 1980s, which is a Peter Markley building in Switzerland called the Hobie House, which also kind of uses these kind of dwarf columns that sit on this pediment and that define a kind of amenity outdoor space behind that. But really the heart of what we're doing is working with these kind of communal areas, because we think that's just as much about the way that these infills operate if we're going to put them next to existing accommodation. We wanted to work with deck access. I've been a kind of long-term critic of deck access, but what we're trying to do is almost explore how we can make it work better. I think that some of the keys to that are to make it more open. So in the age of COVID, that's become even more important. So this idea of, if you're going to have communal areas, you don't have them as pokey, hidden away, and kind of concealed where people are at risk, or people don't feel safe, or they become kind of unlooked after, particularly if you have to have lots of homes that come off of them. Just to give you a typical example, on a standard kind of 1960s deck access housing kind of block, what you get is about 30 flats sharing a single stair course, so nobody really takes ownership of it. If you kind of took all the buildings away on a Georgian terrace and you just left the stair course, you would see that there was actually a stair course every 5 meters rather than every 30 meters, which kind of substantially changes the way that those stair courses are used and the way those stair courses are kind of treated and owned. So that's something that's been really important to us. But we also kind of wanted to work with these kind of, how can we make both a rational plan, but one that is not as kind of rigid, that's a bit more kind of loose and a bit more interesting. And we've looked at kind of precedents from people like Sergis and Bates and some of our kind of other and Stephen Taylor and some of the people who we admire, who are kind of more interested in social housing, because I think we're in a kind of interesting way of framing social housing at the moment, that it's not just about kind of egg crates, because people understand that what you get out of that. I grew up in social housing as well as managed social housing as well as design social housing, so I've got a very specific perspective on that. What you get at the end of it, if you're very careful about it, is a kind of, you know, is a good citizen at the end of it. I mean, I often say, like, you get a kind of poster child of good housing like me. So if you put that in the input, the thing you get out of it is a lot better. I think I'll leave it there for now because I'm probably running over time, and let Ruth come back in. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely great presentation, and lovely to see that range of projects, all with such a strong social feel to them. I got a couple of questions that have come in about, I think they're really asking where these projects came from. You know, what, one of them saying, were you already working with a local authority to be able to suggest these infill site possibilities, or was this something you had observed and took the potential to the local authority? Because they're not all, you know, they are, we all know that infill is really important, but it's not always the most obvious of projects, is it?
That's right. I think both of the both of the models that the question have explicitly stated are valid and can work. But we found that depending on the council, that's quite hard. I mean, that both of those also rely on a kind of pre-existing relationship with the right person in the council. Most people, they won't mind me saying this, I used to work for a council, and I happen to know that it's the case. Most people who work in councils only have enough power to say no. So what you often need to find is the person who's got the power to say yes, which is really, really hard. It's often very opaque. The way we came about these projects was because Tower Hamlets are quite enlightened in this respect, in that they already had a small sites register. So lots of councils have had the obligation to develop a small sites register, and lots of those have looked at those in different ways. So it's not that those sites aren't there, the councils don't know about them, but they have a list of priorities. Their teams are often quite small, so they can't procure all of them as fast as they'd even want to if they could. So it's often, it was luck, but it was luck that took, I would say, 5 years of kind of trying to speak to people, trying to find that right person, trying to present our particular experience and our particular approach in the kind of traditional way architects put themselves in front of clients. I'm afraid there's no short answer. It's a short answer.
Well done on having found your way through it. I'm going to ask you one more question. Actually, no, I'm not, because I think we're getting really tight for time and we need to move on. So I'm going to thank you very much, David. I'm just going to answer one question which has come in, which is about whether or not this presentation will be available. It'll be a slightly edited version because actually some of the material that David shared is not available for complete public use, but it will be an edited version and it will be sent out to you shortly. It's not obviously attached to the delegate pack, partly because we haven't done it yet. So actually now we are going to move on to Helen Castle and Julia Park, and they're going to have this discussion, which is going to be incredibly relevant to where we are now. And then again, we will just pop in with a couple of questions at the end of it. Thank you.
Hello. Morning. Thank you so much, Ruth, and also David, for a really fascinating presentation there. As Ruth has already mentioned, it's really timely to have Julia here with us today. Julia's got a long and deep background in housing research, but also in policy and talking to government. And I really want to take the opportunity to draw out some of her insights about Boris's announcements yesterday. So, Julia, yesterday Boris announced his intention to build through his Project Speed, through the Project Speed initiative, with a cash injection for housing, as well as health, education, and infrastructure. What do you anticipate being the pitfalls and the opportunities of this investment now approach?
Well, there's obviously no doubt that we need more housing, and that's been clear for many, many years. And there's also no doubt that that will need government investment. But we have to start building the right type of housing. And by that, I mean housing that's good for people of all ages and good for the planet. My main worry is that the commitment to speed feels much stronger than any commitment to quality or longevity. It feels very rushed. I'm not sure the money's enough. Not that anyone is minded to turn it down, but there's also a sort of underlying, very explicit commitment to more deregulation. And I really don't think that's the answer, particularly in a sector that's dominated by private developers. It never leads to better outcomes. So that's a real concern, I think.
Picking up on that concern around deregulation, there's also a kind of promise that they're going to centralise or reinvent the planning system. What are your particular concerns about loosening planning restrictions?
Yes, I mean, it's not clear what they're planning to do. There's been talk of zonal planning. There's certainly talk of more permitted development rights, which is really worrying. I mean, you probably know that we've been very vocal about some of the dreadful outcomes of office to residential conversions under PDR, and I frankly, it's had a lot of press coverage, and I'm really disappointed that they seem determined to expand it rather than curtail it. So that's a huge worry. I heard Clive Betts on the radio this morning, actually, and he expressed similar worries. So there are important people worried about that in particular. And James Brokenshire, Robert Jenrick's predecessor, committed to a review of the quality of homes produced under PDR last March. We still haven't seen the report. I understand it was finished and submitted in January, but you would hope that the outcome of that review would be made public and discussed before leaping on to the next round of more PDR. So it's incredibly worrying. I'm worried about talk about merging use classes as well. I mean, I think there's definitely work to do there, but shops don't necessarily make good housing. Some of them do, some of them don't. I live in Tewkesbury, where the pavements are incredibly narrow. Shop windows are right on the edge of the pavement. And I just fear a sea of randomly dotted net curtains, to be honest with you. The shops are actually very deep as well, so there'll be very little light at the back. As I say, it can work, and office to resi, just as office to resi conversions can. But you have
and I guess those kind of speedy conversions suggest really that architects may not even particularly have a place in this kind of speed project in delivering so much housing. How do you think architects can ensure that they have a central role in housing design and delivery moving forward, whether it's social housing or private housing?
I think it's often very difficult for architects to play the role they wish to in these, particularly in permitted development schemes, because design isn't a material consideration. So it's not top of anyone's list. The whole point of PDR is that you bypass basic rules in the interest of expediency. But I mean, more generally, I think that developers will certainly need us to meet zero carbon in presumably the majority of new homes will still go through a planning process. Mm-hmm. And there's a fairly firm commitment to climate change, we hope. And they're going to need architects because it begins right at the start of a project, doesn't it? You have to take the right decisions about form, layout, and orientation, and you have to keep that rigor going throughout the whole project, you know, right through to where you put the letterbox. You'll know that from the lovely Goldsmith scheme. So they do need us, and of course, you know, we're juggling lots of balls at the same time. Fire safety is an incredibly important issue, and that's still in a bit of flux. It's absolutely vital that, you know, they use good designers to keep all these balls in the air and ensure safe and delightful outcomes.
Well, it was very kind of uplifting to hear how David had really worked in an entrepreneurial way as an architect on infill projects like that with councils, particularly as a smaller practice. With the COVID-19 crisis, the home really became the focus of everyone's lives. Ruth suggests this already. So with social units being defined as households as such, individuals' experiences of lockdown were largely dependent on housing quality combined with access to green space. Are you hopeful that the light that was shone on social and housing inequality by the pandemic will have a long-term influence feeding into better affordable housing provision?
Another good question. I don't think the need for everyone to live in a good home has ever been more important or more obvious. I've actually been very excited by the possibility that COVID might lead to a will to do better. I'm slightly less excited, or slightly more wary since Boris's speech yesterday. But it is early days, and I really hope that he sees sense and we do get better outcomes, not just quicker outcomes. As you say, Helen, just having access to outdoor space, even a balcony, has made in these last few months, hasn't it? And despite the fact that the GLA has required a new home to have at least 5 square metres of private open space to every flat, we're building we've been building lots of very large build-to-rent schemes without a single balcony. And I just think that's so short-sighted, and I think in some ways COVID has already, you know, proved that. Just a nice view from our front window has allowed us to connect with our neighbours visually, hasn't it? Sort of, you know, reminded us that we're not quite as alone as we sometimes might feel, and just those simple things have been so important.
I think both the view and the ventilation are been really precious, haven't they, to people? Yes, really precious.
Yes.
Another area that you've undertaken a considerable amount of research with your book on age-friendly housing as well. And this, of course, is another area which really there's been lights being shone on during this time, and that is care homes. And actually written a piece on BD about the need to really look at the design of care homes. Could you talk us through, as an architect, how you would approach the design of a care home after the pandemic? What would change? Where should the emphasis lie?
Yes, I mean, I haven't really had much time to think about it in detail, but I think the main thing is a less institutional feel and layout. there are examples of care homes where people are sort of grouped into sort of smaller households, which is more manageable and also feels more like a real home. So I think that's going to be an important thing to look at. And doing that, it's quite easy to see how that would, for example, facilitate infection control more easily than a very long corridor with, you know, with narrow corridor with rooms off each side. I think the internal environment should be much healthier than is typically the place. Care homes have a reputation, perhaps not always deservedly, for being quite stuffy and hot. That's not really good for us. It's important that people don't get too cold, obviously, but as you said, ventilation is vitally important. The connection with outside space is just as important. And we need to be clever about how we make that comfortable for people.
A lot of care homes really feel like stuffy wards. I was saying this from a sort of a point of interest, really, because my daughter's been working in a care home during COVID-19, and you know, it was impossible really to not stop all the staff and patients or residents get the virus. So yeah, so I think it's a really interesting area. So really, just to finish off this chat with you, Julia, there are probably a lot of architects out there attending this session, and it was great to see that we've got an audience of 340 with us today.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite impressive. So there's a lot of architects who are seeking new areas to work in housing, whether they're sole practitioners or in large practice. What specific area within the housing sector do you think requires more attention from architects, and really a sort of developing architects' expertise, you know, and is in an area that requires their attention and where there may be work?
Yes, I've always believed genuinely that designing any home is a privilege and an opportunity that should never be squandered. You know, I don't think about any type of housing particularly being more important than any other, if you know what I mean. Having said that, if I had to pick one thing where we really do have to skill up, it would be in tackling climate change. We're on a very fast learning curve there, so that's going to be incredibly important. And it is designing social housing does remind you it is a very severe test in many ways, because these homes are intended to be fully occupied. You know, there is no spare space. Every bed is allocated to, will be slept in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really,
these homes are
so tight,
hard, as they should be, but that does mean they have to be good enough. Otherwise, the stresses really start to tell. And
now, I'm sure there's lots of people in the audience who've wanted to ask you questions. So I'm going to hand back to Ruth now to give you some questions from the floor, from the virtual floor. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you very much. I've seen questions come in about space standards, and I think particularly with the fact that a lot of people have had to work at home as well. You know, not only have people obviously been quite shut in their homes, often with their children, but people are having to treat the home as a place to work. Do you think this is or should have an effect on the space standards that we have? Or if we actually kept to them, do you think we'd be okay?
I think the main thing is to get the space standard that we already have mandated through regulation. At the moment, it's an optional standard, so local authorities can opt in, but they don't have to. And of course, if we go back to PDR conversions, it can't apply at all because there is no planning system through which to apply it. So I've been a very long standing proponent of space standards, and indeed had a hand in the current one. I've always thought it's incredibly important. because space is what ultimately gives us choices and rooms that work.
Thank you. I've also had a question about, you touched on shop to residential conversion and said that might not be very suitable. We've obviously also seen quite a lot of office to residential conversion, which I think you also mentioned, and some of which has been far from satisfactory. However people discuss the future of the office, it seems certain that there will be less office space needed, and that may partly just influence new office development, but it does suggest that there will be further pressure to convert offices into residential. What's your feeling about that?
Well, our feeling has always been that it's not a bad idea in principle. If an office isn't used anymore, then we should do our best to find a new use for it. And in many cases, that may well be housing. Our problem with the way it's been done is that there are no checks and balances on the quality of the homes that result. I mean, building regs apply, but they, as I said, they don't cover space, they don't cover conversions don't have to provide accessible housing. It means there doesn't need to be any open space, outdoor open space. So an awful lot of important attributes can be missing. So as I say, we're not against the conversions in principle, but we just think the planning system exists for a reason, and and one of those reasons is to ensure that the outcomes are good enough. It's as simple as that.
Yes, and I think also on the same sort of topic, I've got a question here which says, with documents such as the Housing Design Guide being in interim edition for the past 10 years, lifetime homes abolished and developers looking to design to the absolute minimum standards possible, can we expect any guidance to come forward that actually focuses on the comfort in the house, especially since companies are now more and more looking to have people working from home? And I think alongside that, there's a question, and I think it's a broader question. A couple of people have said, well, you've painted the picture, now tell me what architects can actually do about it.
Gosh, there's a lot in that. I think architects are incredibly important. I think we add huge social value as well as financial value. I just think we're not let into enough housing projects at the moment. You know, we're not given the opportunity to do our best work very often. What was the first that you asked me? Sorry.
Well, it was about a lot of sort of changing documents and saying, can we expect any guidance to come forward that actually focuses on comfort in the house, you know, especially in the light of people working at home? Yes,
the new draft London plan does actually mention comfort in the home. The problem is how you translate that to policy. We will be getting a new housing design guide. There's a draft already online actually, but things have been held up and the election has been deferred, as you know. So I think, relatively speaking, London has always done quite well. And the design guide was popular, and there will, as I say, be another one. But nationally, it's a very patchy picture. I mean, I personally would like to see anything suitable for regulation to go into regulation, because then it's non-negotiable, it's fairer, it just cements it in the way we do things, but it isn't suitable for every attribute.
Thank you. I know you have to go, so but that's been a fascinating discussion. So thank you very much to Julia and also to Helen for conducting this as an interview, which I think has been fascinating. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a break. It's just coming up to 9:45, and we're going to come back with our next two speakers. I'm going to start promptly at 10 o'clock. So as I said, go away if you need to, do whatever you need to do, and please come back here. Don't everybody turn your computers off. Don't leave this seminar, just walk away, and we'll be back and ready to roll at 10 o'clock. And just thank you again. Normally I'd be asking for a big hand for our speakers, but that doesn't seem to work. So just thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We've got the second half now of this RIBA Journal PiP seminar in association with Kingspan. We had a fantastic first half. We also had some really good questions come in, but could I ask you all, please, when you do send your questions in, could you hit the Q&A button, please, and not the chat button? I think that's it. And I think with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Kate McGechan from Haverstock, who's going to talk to us about what promises to be a really fascinating project. Kate.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to start by sharing my screen, so please bear with me. Can everyone see that?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Kate McGechan and I'm an associate at Haverstock, and I'm going to be using Linden Farm as a case study to talk about the subject of special housing. So for those of you that don't know, Linden Farm is a supported living setting for adults with autism, which we completed last summer. I was a project architect, so it's been my baby for a couple of years now. So the talk is very loosely structured. I'm going to attempt to set the scene, give you an overview of the project and the brief, and go through some of the challenges and some of the lessons learned, and attempt to finish off with a conclusion. But firstly, just to introduce Haverstock. So we are based in Camden, North London, and I think it's fair to say we're perhaps best known as specialists in school, particularly SEN school design, but we've got a very broad range of residential projects. This is a barn, a development that we've recently finished in Suffolk, to some high-rise residential, and we predominantly working in the public sector on a range of public buildings, and this is one of the crematories which we've just finished. But as I started off with schools, we're known for our schools. This is Tufnell Park School, our first fully modular school, which we're incredibly proud of. And again, that finished last summer, and we challenge anyone to guess that it is in fact a modular building. So special needs housing. So what do we mean by special needs housing? So I think a lot of people, when we talk about any form of sheltered housing, supported living, people first tend to think about homes for the elderly, but there's all sorts of vulnerable adults that need special housing from a range of additional needs, from learning disabilities, social and emotional difficulties, and a range of neurodiverse conditions. I could go on, but Linden Farm is a specific housing scheme for young adults with autism. So for those of you that don't know what autism is, forgive me, I'm just going to read the description from the Autistic Society. So autism is a lifelong development disability that affects how a person communicates with and relates to other people and how they experience the world around us. Some people can be incredibly high functioning and lead very independent lives, whilst others can have complex and high care needs. And it's the residents at Linden Farm are on this end of the spectrum. So they require 2-to-1 staff support care throughout the day and night. The majority of the residents are non-verbal, and they wear continence products. They have extreme sensory sensitivities, primarily to noise and light, and they have pica, so they have a tendency to eat non-food items, and nearly half of the residents have quite severe epilepsy and learning difficulties as well. So just generally, again, trying to set the scene. So what is a supported living setting? And there's all sorts of terminologies: supported living, assisted living, sheltered, enhanced sheltered housing, extra care, closed care, specialist housing. It goes on and on. But really the core ingredients is an accessible design that promotes appropriate independent living. So appropriate independent living is quite an important thing to keep in your mind. They're usually self-contained properties with their own front door. Again, own front door, that's something you don't get in care homes. And ability for the residents to have, usually have their own sort of tenancies, so they can control who enters their home, and that usually involves who is the care provider. They usually have some sort of communal and therapy facilities attached, access to support and care 24 hours a day, and they usually have some sort of community alarms and assistive technologies. So to the specific brief for Linden Farm, so as I mentioned, we've got 10 residents, they're young adults, aged, I think it's 19 to 23. The majority of them were in a residential school setting, but obviously they've got to the age where the school setting was no longer appropriate. So we've got 4 buildings, a mixture of housing typologies. I'm just going to flip to the master plan here. So we've got 5 individual cottages, which are to the left of, to the right of the page. We've got a 2-person cottage and a 3-person cottage, and the building in the middle on the north of the site, that is it's coined the new barn. That is a shared building that houses the sensory therapy provision, an activity room, and the staff support facilities. And the residents were located in the either a shared cottage or an independent and self-contained cottage, depending on their need. And the way it's ended up is that the residents with high care needs are actually in the 1-bed cottages, and the 2- and 3-bed, it's the residents that can cope with sharing with other people. And to the master plan, so it's an absolutely beautiful site. It's set in Althorpe, a little village in Surrey, south of Guildford, for those of you that know the area. It's got an ancient woodland to the north, the trees that you can just see in the shot, and the homes are anchored in a rich framework of horticulture and sensory garden framework. So the next few slides, I'm just going to take you through some of the spaces and my favourite details of the scheme. And for this shot here, just to talk you through some of the materiality. So we've got steel roofs with hidden gutters, brickwork chimneys and timber cladding throughout, and large roof lights over the entrance doorways. This photograph here is of an external dining area, so with an open pergola, and you can probably just about make out some of the cladding details on how they vary on the gable end. This is one of my favourite spots in the whole of the scheme. This is a shared dining area, so this is in the 3-bed cottage, and this is one of the hallways. So it'll be referenced quite a bit as I go through, but one of the strong objectives of the whole scheme is that it's by no means in the way institutional in its feel or its aesthetics, and this hallway I think is a good example of that. That links to the outside, the natural neutral palette, and the use of natural materials. So moving on to some of the challenges, and this isn't necessarily specific to Linden Farm, but on other designers might face on other supported living settings. So how do you create that homely environment? When you're within the brief, that robustness, durability, cleanability are primary concern of the client. The numbers of conversations we had about bodily fluids, how can it be cleaned? We could spend all day. But so you've got that juxtaposition of durability, yet the perceived softness at the forefront of every decision. And I can't stress enough, it's the little details, it's the nooks and crannies that can cause problems for the users and the care providers. So we've got the CLT panels, you know, the junctions, how we dealt with the junctions are very carefully sealed. And we were hoping to have parquet flooring. Unfortunately, that got value engineered out. But, you know, the flooring, what is the most appropriate for flooring, whilst absolutely not wanting it to feel like a medical, a hospital situation. Safety in the home, again, a high up the list of priorities on any sort of special housing scheme, as kitchens and bathrooms are perceived as a particular hazard to the clients. So at first glance, the kitchen layout might look perhaps a little bit odd, you know, the odd oven arrangement. This was developed out of, I've lost track of the number of client engagement sessions we had on it, but the idea being that it's eye height and that a carer can go either side of the resident to help get things out of the oven. The taps, I have to confess, I don't particularly like the taps. They're not a particularly beautiful architectural sort of gem, but you know, robustness and clarity was key in every decision. So having separate taps, hot and cold, what was legible. White goods, again, normally, you know, in my kitchen at home, I don't have non-integrated white goods, but, you know, does it look like a fridge? Can you tell which is a fridge or freezer? Really key when you're working with autistic clients. The bathrooms, very careful consideration because of the risk of flooding, because many of the residents have an infatuation with water. So the water can be easily isolated and shut off. The toilets, very carefully positioned because to prevent clients from barricading themselves between the wall and the toilet pan. No mirrors. This can be a great source of confusion and anxiety for the residents, but actually in reality, I have noticed the last few times, I think we've got 2 of the residents, they have put their own mirrors in. So again, one solution is not, you know, the one for all. Lessons learned, everyone loves CLT, obviously slightly subjective, but on this project, it's been a massive success. And I think it really aids and supports the feeling of calm and well-being. You know, the exposed visual to CLT walls and the structural solution, the fact that it is the CLT enabled the large windows, the high ceilings, and you know, having the exposed visual wood, just the natural materials all contribute to the feeling of light and space. Completely lovely timber, that's what CLT, the project manager as the client side, speed of delivery, prefabrication. I think most people in the room are well versed with that, but it just worked a treat. I've mentioned this a few times already, but the importance of well-being, very much a buzzword at the moment, but you know, creating a homely environment. How do you do that for people who are living in supported living settings? It's, you know, the location, the site, the light, the views to the external grounds. You know, scheme has been designed for young people with autism, but in reality, it would suit a range of people with a range of additional needs and none, you know, I myself would love to move in with my young family. So I think this is my penultimate slide. So the importance of assistive technology, environmental controls. So the image in the middle is a really small, it's the telecare port, so it's the size of a light switch, and this allows staff to discreetly monitor the residents, which is particularly helpful at night when they've got reduced staffing levels. How do you control the environment? The light switches on the right hand side, the flat plate side, so there is no on-off solution. We've got slow rising light levels with no immediate on-off, and no PIR. So again, it's all about control, that the residents have full control and appropriate control. So attempt to sum up. So special housing, they're wonderful, I think, for any architect and designer to be involved in, because they're an opportunity to design better. It's as with with any brief, a difficult brief can often create much stronger schemes and proposals. What I found working with the Linden farm team, that working with clients with complex needs, it challenges us to listen more and to design for their, you could say, disability or ability, depending on which way you want to look at it, but first. And I believe that when we design for disability first, we often develop a solution that is better than designing for the norm. And it is just a beautiful place to be. But just as a word for us all to, as we're starting to come out of lockdown, the residents and lots of other care homes and similar settings, they are still in full-on lockdown, and as they have been since March. They've got no visitors, no family are allowed to attend, and as a care provider, not even managers are allowed to attend. So it's really just have a little thoughtful, whilst we're all starting to come out of the thick of the lockdown, there are a lot of people and a lot of shielders who are still stuck at home, wherever that might be. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that was fascinating. I think one of the things that was lovely was that we got into the nitty-gritty of the project, and I just kept thinking, goodness, if all our housing could be detailed with that degree of attention, I think we'd all be very happy. Not surprisingly, the questions we're getting coming in are also related to the detail. And I'm going to ask you a couple of them, and then perhaps you can come back and answer them as you feel like.
Yeah.
So one of them is, why didn't you use carpet in the corridors for acoustic nuisance? Another one is, many countries, excepting the Brits, use floor drains in bathrooms and kitchens. Did you consider those for flood mitigation? And there are also a couple of questions about how you've made the kitchens and bathrooms all white, and kind of, is there a risk of a whiteout or snow blindness, especially if people have visual impairments?
Yeah. So if I start from the back of the list of the questions, so to
yes.
do the colour. So that was a very, very purposeful and conscious decision, that to have a neutral palette as possible, and then the residents would and will personalise them as and when they occupy the spaces, because a lot of our residents, one of the young women has got her thing is pink flamingos. Whatever we did, we could never second guess what their residence thing would be. So the idea is that they will personalise them, and it will possibly be done by soft furnishing as well. But I absolutely agree with you about the wipeout, that with the visual impairment difficulties, but actually that we purposely and consciously, it's all captured in the access statement, that some people, colour contrast isn't a great thing, that the sensory overload. So for example, our doors, they're all doors, we don't have a contrast between the walls. But if at some point in the future, because we're hoping that our residents will be there for the next 20, 30, 40 years, if and when they develop any difficulties, or they have new residents or slightly older people, those things can be added on in a later date. So it was a very conscious decision. The question about floor drains, we do have a floor drain in the bathroom. At one point in some of the one stage of the proposals, they were going to be wet rooms, or we were going to be offering residents the choice of bath or shower. Unfortunately, the residents hadn't been identified at the decision point. So the idea was that a bath would be put in with a floor drain. So floor drain for everyday cleaning, but a shower, or it could be turned into a wet room very quickly and easily. The kitchens do not have a floor drain, but in terms of flooding, again, so many discussions with the client. There is a water shut off, and the door, depending on the resident, the door can be closed off in certain points if it is a particular risk. I think there was one more question
It was about floors and why you didn't put carpets on the floors for acoustic attenuation.
Oh yeah, forgive me for being crude, but it was all about we and poo, the discussions we had. You know, a lot of our residents, as I mentioned, they do wear continence products and they will be naked a lot of the time. So ease of cleaning was, you know, a base of any discussion. So yeah, we only have carpet in the staff areas, in the staff bedrooms and staff offices. Everywhere else, it's the vinyl flooring. And some of our residents have pica, which I mentioned, so they can and do eat soft furnishings. So if a resident does want to have a softer finish, it was understood that that would be done through rugs and sort of inlay bits like that.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. And also you clarified that those residents will be there for a long time, because when you said, oh, 19 to 23, I thought, where do they go next? But that's obviously because it's a new facility and those are the people who are moving in. Thank you so much. We're going to move on now to our final speaker, who is Karen Jones, who is a residential development manager at Kingspan. Obviously, you know, this seminar is in association with Kingspan, and she's going to talk about the real value of space in private rental homes, which is obviously incredibly topical subject now. So over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to hide my video because I'm going to bring up her presentation and then just talk you through it, and then we'll do questions at the end. So let me just share my screen with you. Okay, share screen. Okay, so you should all see the presentation now. Okay, so just to quickly introduce Kingspan, if you don't know who we are, Kingspan Installation is part of the Kingspan Group. We're market leader in manufacture and supply of premium and high performance insulation products, insulated systems for building fabric, as well as building service applications. So we're going to start with, oh, the presentations, oh, that's it. We're going to start talking about value of space and costs associated with the actual build-up costs. So obviously the usable space within a building is a fundamental metric in understanding the valuation and thus the investment potential of real estate. So property with a greater internal floor area commands a higher return rental in addition to higher overall financial value, and could therefore give rise to a greater return on investment. The width of external walls incorporating our cool therm wall insulation is thinner than that incorporating comparative insulations, so facilitating internal space gains without having to increase the overall designed footprint of the building. With the aim of quantifying the financial benefit that resulted from the insulating the external walls of domestic buildings using our Kingspan cool therm solutions, we commissioned Curry and Brown to investigate the real value of space in domestic real estate. So just quickly, the low lambda of cool therm range means that either the same U values can be achieved with a thinner board, and or better U value can be achieved without increasing the thickness. So walls can be kept slimmer with no thermal loss efficiency, making the most of the available space. Phenolic insulation is thinner than mineral fibre for any given U value, about half as thick. So this can not only mean that more floor space on a new build, reduction in transport costs due to greater capacity per vehicle, reduction in storage space, time saving due to speed of install, lighter in weight, meaning easier to install as well. It also means lower structural movement on brackets and rail systems, better daylighting, and thinner walls, which in turn gives shallower reveals. But what we wanted to do was quantify the return on investment that you would get from creating more rentable space by using thinner insulation. So space is critical, especially in areas such as central London and Edinburgh. So we asked, what was the real value of space? It's clear from Curry and Brown's findings that our Cawthorne products considered to be the insulation of choice for both new non-domestic and domestic buildings, where return on investment is key. So firstly, Curry and Brown's study analyses the financial value of the additional internal floor area gained through the use of thinner wall insulation in domestic new builds. The analysis considered both a range of building characteristics, so size and shape, a range of commercial variables, which was geographic location, rental value, and material costs that are represented within our standard domestic building stock across Great Britain. These factors were used to create a model from which a database of 20 building instances were generated. The database buildings were subsequently analysed to identify the return on investment of the internal space gained by using the Cawthorne wall solutions. So to establish the extent of this financial benefit on a given building, 4 types of external wall construction were examined. For each scenario, a comparison was made between the 2 build-ups that differed by the installation specification only. So option 1 was a full fill cavity construction brick and block using our Kingspan Cawthorne K106 product. Option 2, partial full cavity wall construction brick and block using K108. Option 3, external render construction with block work using Cawthorne K5. And option 4, a ventilated frame screen warm wall construction with a steel frame base using K15. All these options were then compared against rock mineral fibre in these same build-ups. The construction width and cost for each build-up were used as a direct input into the models, and the subsequent output of the models were evaluated to determine the capex investment cost of the additional space, the capitalised market value of the additional space in terms of yield and rental income. So the return on investment was then calculated by dividing the former by the latter to correlate the database findings with real buildings and real cost information. The same method of calculation that was used in the analysis, so the database buildings, was later applied to 4 real case market cases in buildings ranging from London to Leeds. The dwelling types on these were mansion blocks, single domestic dwellings, and student accommodation. So here is an example of one of the wall build-ups, which is a ventilated rain screen warm wall construction with a steel frame. The build-up incorporating the Cawthorne K15 rain screen equated to a total of 369.8mm width construction with a cost of £559 and 9p per square metre. The same build-up incorporating rock mineral fibre was 519.8mm wide and a total cost per square metre of £536 and 21p. So despite a capex uplift of £22.88 per square metre, the overall width of the build-up incorporating the Cawthorne K15 is 150mm thinner than that incorporating rock mineral fibre. This wall build-up was then applied to a student apartment in student accommodation block. The lettable floor area of the case study building was 20 square metres of the single apartment. However, the additional internal floor area gained from using the K15 amounted to 0.5 square metres. The student accommodation was in London. It was 1-bedroom studio apartment, as mentioned in a student accommodation block. The building is located in zones 2 and 3 within London, and the studio apartment is one of 22 apartments on the floor plate. The building is new build and on an existing brownfield site with demolition having already been taken place. The capitalised value of the space is £10,702. The case study showed the highest return on investment at 2,213%. So the findings show that despite the requirement capex for uplifting from £22.88 per square metre to £37.83 for wall constructions and a 0.28% to 7.31% and specifying core thermal solutions in lieu of the comparative solutions can provide an overwhelming return on investment. Out of the 20 days, irrespective of any capex uplift, and all showed a positive return for the sale element. So the rapid offset in the capex cost of the additional space by the market value of that additional space is further underpinned by the findings for the real case studies for the buildings. For instance, the student accommodation building located in London with a 3.5% yield and annual rental income of £847.60 per square metre showed a return on investment, as mentioned, at 2,213%. So it's clear from the Curry and Brown findings that our core thermal all insulation solutions should be considered as an insulation of choice for new domestic buildings, a consideration for the developers, owners and investors. So in order to help assess our products against these costs, we've developed an app that can be used to calculate the return on investment from commercial real estate. Using the app, you can see the return on investment you can actually achieve. All you need to do is pick your build and the rental value, then set your floor area. So as policy and legislation continues to target those activities that consume vast amounts of energy and contribute most to CO2 emissions, particularly in buildings subject to more increasingly stringent energy performance, particularly in the change in the regulations that are going to be happening next year and further on, there's going to be a subsequent increase in the pressure on the wall costs, on the wall thickness, in order to achieve these requirements. So poorer performing insulation materials can add to the ever diminishing indoor space, particularly in buildings with limited to a fixed footprint. So over time, this can erode the financial value and investment potential of that building. So thank you for listening. You can download the full white paper on our website. So if you go to kingspaninsulation.co.uk/real value of space. And we do offer some other CPDs as well. So I'm going to take myself off of show my video and stop sharing the screen now. Okay.
Thank you very much. You're back with us in person. I think that's really interesting. I think it's great to actually hear some numbers put to ideas. We've had a number of questions come in. One of them is about air tightness. How critical is this, and how do you ensure its effectiveness on site?
I think a lot of the issues with air tightness is going to come down to detailing. There needs to be a lot more discussions with how products are installed with other things.
Okay. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think we've lost Karen, which is a shame at the end of what's been a really fascinating event. So I think I'm going to thank you all very much for attending, and I'm going to draw this to a close. There have been several questions about whether or not you can actually get the presentations. And as I think I said earlier, but you may not all have heard me, yes, they will be sent out. They will be slightly edited because there is some material that's not approved for distribution. I've seen lots of chat coming in saying how much people have enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed it. So I think all that remains really is to thank all our speakers, to thank you all for coming, and to say that you will be notified about forthcoming events. There is one on offices at the same time next week. And hope to see you all again. Thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Kingspan. Thank you to RIBA Journal and to PiP for organising this. And I think it's time to go. Get on with the day. Thank you very much indeed. Bye.